Good afternoon, and welcome everyone to Venture Philanthropy in Action, the race for an Alzheimer's cure with Dr. Rudy Tanzi and Henry McCance. Avi Stein and I created Cresset with the intention to create a platform to enrich our clients' lives by giving them firsthand access to world-class investment management, as well as opportunities for learning and growth with programs like this one today. Mats Lederhausen, who is a dear friend, advisory board member for both Cresset and the Cure Alzheimer's Fund, will be leading our conversation today with two men whose dedication and focus has led to tremendous progress in our understanding of one of the most elusive and devastating diseases in the world. We will end our session today with Q&A, so please submit your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we will address those at the bottom of the call. So without further delay, Mats, I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Eric, and welcome everybody. It's good to be with all of you. Hope we'll have a informative and inspiring session. One of the many reasons, and perhaps the strongest one for why I am a Cresset investor and supporter, is that money really matters. And Eric and Avi have both consistently demonstrated an ability and a desire to invest capital with intentions beyond profit. They believe, like I do, that capitalism, when done right, is the best and most powerful way of creating value for society. And these conversations in the Cresset ecosystem are just one of many ways they invest in ideas that can shape our understanding and ultimately help us all make better investment decisions for us and for future generations. So it is truly great to be here. Since you are a numbers crowd, I wanted to jump right in with some brutal facts, not to depress you, but they happen to be true. 146 is the percentage increase in deaths from Alzheimer's between 2000 and 2018. 6 is the number in millions of Americans living with Alzheimer's today. 5 in 10 is the number of adults estimated to have Alzheimer's by age 85. And 0, sadly, is the sum total of people who have survived Alzheimer's in all of history. And finally, $300 billion is the expected annual cost to US society, growing at a rapid rate and expected to exceed $1 trillion by 2050. Yet only a fraction, or about 2% of that cost, is being invested to find a cure and to target solutions. And by the way, these costs do not include the indirect costs, the enormous pain, suffering, and investment in time that all families supporting people with Alzheimer's have to spend. And Alzheimer's is always and invariably fatal. More than just memory loss, Alzheimer's is a progressive, irreversible neurological disorder that slowly and insidiously robs the person of their identity and very essence, and eventually shutting down all of their bodily functions. With those stark statistics in mind, we will hear from, as Eric mentions, two pioneers at the forefront on the effort to hopefully one day eradicate this terrible disease. So how did I end up here? One might ask, or you might ask. Many years ago, my dear mother was diagnosed with early onset dementia. She sadly passed away 2 years ago. But back then, when I was looking for better answers in terms of things we could do, I was looking everywhere. And as luck would have it, Henry McCance has been an advisor, partner, and friend to me as the chairman of our limited partners advisory board at Q-Ball, an evergreen venture capital firm I co-founded 12 years ago. And he had shared with me his own frustrations with the state of Alzheimer's research and what he and a few friends were doing about it. And I was impressed. And as usual, when Henry dissects any problems or opportunities, he does it with surgical precision and clarity, and a deep reservoir of commitment, and his wonderfully contagious inevitability of success that always exudes out of him. And obviously, one of the first things we all do when we look for anything is to look for people. So Henry asked, who is the best Alzheimer's scientist out there? And that's what led Henry to Dr. Rudy Tanzi. So we are very lucky and privileged and honored to have these incredible men here with us to learn what they are doing to fund and find answers to a disease that so many of us have or will face indirectly or directly at some stage in our life journey. introducing them properly would take the rest of the hour. So here's a really fast take. Henry McCance lived in the world of venture capitalism. He led Greylock Partners in its early involvement in the software industry, helping build approximately 300 developing companies. His success led him to be named one of the top venture capitalists by Forbes magazine. And today you will hear he is dedicating his time and philanthropic endeavors to Alzheimer's research as one of the co-founders of the not-for-profit Cure Alzheimer's Fund, which has accelerated Alzheimer's research far beyond what anyone could have predicted. And Dr. Rudy Tanzi, an incredibly accomplished scientist and trailblazer at the forefront of Alzheimer's research. Dr. Tanzi is director of the Genetics and Aging Research Unit, co-director of the McCance Center for Brain Health, co-director of the Mass General Institute for Neurodegenerative Disease, and vice chair of neurology at Massachusetts General Hospital, and the Joseph P. and Rose F. Kennedy Professor of Neurology at Harvard Medical School. And as a leading Alzheimer's researcher and world-class geneticist, he discovered the first 3 Alzheimer's disease genes and the first neuroinflammation-related Alzheimer's gene, CD33. And Dr. Tanzi has published nearly 600 papers, received numerous awards, is a New York Times bestselling author and PBS host, and was one of the Time 100 most influential people in the world. What is less known, and despite these impressive achievements, is even much more inspiring to me, is that Rudy is a fantastic piano player and have, amongst other claims to fame, rocked live and in studio with Aerosmith. And that is really awesome. So without further delay, let's begin. Welcome, gentlemen. I'll start with you, Henry. You have a deeply personal connection to Alzheimer's, like so many of us or so many people do that get involved in this. So what's the story and how did that came about?
Yeah, so thank you, Eric, and thank you, Mats and Eric and Avi, and thank Cresset for giving us this opportunity to chat. As you said, I was lucky enough to be in the venture capital business my entire working life at Greylock Partners, and enjoying that career when at age 59, in the year 1999, my wife began showing signs of dementia. She was, Allison was an extraordinary woman. She was a researcher at Harvard Business School, a cookbook published author, a highly ranked New England women's tennis player, and a great mother and wife, but she began to lose her short-term memory. So I knew nothing about Alzheimer's disease, nor did she. But unfortunately, we went to teaching hospitals in Boston and learned that that's the disease she had. That started my journey.
All right. And Rudy, before we get too far into the Cure Alzheimer's Fund and what you're doing, could you in I don't know, a few minutes, explain how Alzheimer's attacks and destroys our brain?
Well, it's the best way to think about it is it's a 2-stage process. And the first process begins a decade or 2, maybe even 3 before symptoms. And that's the reason why we're doing so poorly in treating this disease, is that we wait till the brain degenerates to the point of dysfunction, and then we're reactive when we try to bring it back. When, if we look at heart disease or diabetes, we're proactive, right? We look at cholesterol, we look at insulin, glucose. We don't wait for those organs to degenerate. We treat early on before you get there. And that's where we have to go with Alzheimer's. So we know that there's certain pathology that brews decades before symptoms, like the plaques and the tangles. And you want to hit those decades before symptoms. It's too late to do so when you already have the disease. But luckily, we also know there's a pathology that hits when you have the disease symptoms, and that's called neuroinflammation. And now, because of Cure Alzheimer's Fund and them allowing me to discover the first neuroinflammation Alzheimer's gene 12 years ago, we actually have therapies that are in trials and even working for neuroinflammation, and those would be the one that helps the patients now. So bifurcated path, neuroinflammation to help patients now, but if we want to stop this disease early on and never have to help them, hit plaques and tangles early, and we're doing both of that in our lab and at Cure Alzheimer's Fund. And we can get more into that.
Yeah, we'll get deeper as we go here. One common question, though, that a lot of people have often, and I certainly have had, is that how is Alzheimer's different from sort of what I think many of us experience often, which is this kind of, we get older, we feel like we're forgetting things, and we're sort of Alzheimer's light. I got a senile moment. People talk about these things.
Well, it really depends. I mean, as we get older, just like, our joints aren't as good. We can't play as much basketball as we want. And, you don't think quite as fast, and you can't recall a name quite as fast. I mean, it's wear and tear on the entire body, including the brain. So it's acceptable to forget what day it is, or to forget a name, or you can't, tip of the tongue syndrome, right? But, if your memory is really affecting your everyday life, like you can't carry out everyday activities the way you normally would, or it's getting dangerous. You can't cook because as soon as you answer the phone, you forget you're cooking. When it really gets to that point, then you have to stop worrying. And then you might be entering into dementia. And dementia is an umbrella term for that cognitive dysfunction. Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia in the elderly, about 90% of cases of dementia. Yeah.
Okay, Henry. So let's go back to that early stage. When you looked for help and you sought, as we typically do, who are the best doctors? What did you learn about the treating options and treatment options that existed at the time?
So I was fortunate to live in Boston, and has a number of world renowned teaching hospitals, and I visited them all. And I basically heard the same discouraging story. Why don't you try giving Allison 3 Advil a day? It might help. And why don't you try giving her Lipitor, an FDA-approved drug for a totally different condition, reducing cholesterol? And yes, there are a couple of FDA-approved drugs for Alzheimer's disease, like Aricept and Reminol, but they just will reduce the symptoms for maybe 6 months, but they won't really help you. That was the message. Fairly discouraging.
Yes, and knowing you, what did you sort of try to do about it?
I'm a type A venture capitalist, and I've seen the power of coupling visionary entrepreneurs with the proper financial support. As everybody on this call or session knows, that has created a number of companies that have changed our lives. Think Apple, think Google, think the entire biotechnology industry. All was started with venture capital investments. Greylock was fortunate enough to be venture investors in Facebook and LinkedIn and Airbnb, to name 3. Those are all changing people's lives. And so it seemed to me that trying to do something proactive would be worthwhile for me. And fortunately, I was approached, as I was uncertain what to do, but wanting to do something. I was approached by a fellow venture capitalist, Jackie Morby, who'd been a partner at TA Associates, and her husband, Jeff Morby. They were retired. They had identified this gentleman named Rudy Tanzi, who I'd never heard of. And they approached me saying, Henry, we want you to meet Rudy, and maybe we can start a new nonprofit around him. And
when you met him, other than his piano playing, what impressed you?
I didn't know about the piano playing at the time. We had a lunch at the Harvard Club, and as I think you'll quickly discover in the rest of this session, Rudy is an extremely articulate storyteller. He's very engaging. He can take some very complex science and reduce it so that a layman like myself can understand it, at least for a period of time. It was clear to me he was the preeminent geneticist in Alzheimer's disease, and anybody who does an hour of Googling could confirm that. And so the only question I had for him was, Rudy, if we back you to do additional studies and discovering additional genes that are somehow players in this disease, will that be so you win the Nobel Prize, or will that be so that we advance the industry and society towards therapies? And he convinced me of the latter.
So great. And just before I jump into Rudy more into this, the venture capital approach you took, it's beyond, I mean, it's certainly I guess the primary one is finding the entrepreneur
Right.
or the person. But there are other aspects of your approach to cure Alzheimer's and what you learned from venture capital that I also think is at play here. Could you mention a few of those?
Let me quickly run through those. You mentioned the right one. First and foremost is venture capitalists. The really good ones, in my opinion, are proactive. They decide that they want to find a new software as a service company, and they proactively identify young talent in Silicon Valley. Say, when you're ready to start a company, think of Greylock. Well, we had found Rudy, and we asked him, Rudy, you're the shortstop on our team, but we need a pitcher and a center fielder and a catcher. Go recruit a dream team for us. Secondly, of course, venture capitalists think that they are value-add investors. They're not passive. So we were determined at Cure Alzheimer's to help this dream team raise money to do their projects. Thirdly, we're long-term investors, and certainly when you chase a disease as complicated as Alzheimer's disease, you have to have even a longer-term horizon than venture capitalists. And finally, we're high-risk, high-reward kinds of investors. And so when we translate that to Rudy and his team, we said, give us projects that are high risk, high reward, that you can't get funded from your more conservative traditional funding sources like the NIH. Let us try and throw 20-yard passes, if you will. So all of those things worked in thinking how to do Cure Alzheimer's.
That's great. So Rudy, so you then said, these guys are good. They can get me money. I can fund important research. I got to go recruit my team. You called a bunch of these researchers in the world and said, what do you think of this idea? And all of them said yes. Why were they so excited?
Well, at the time, and it's still the case, but even more so then, we were so budget constrained, and it's a lot better now because of Cure Alzheimer's Fund and because of efforts to get some of the NIH funding up since then as well. But, the average really good Alzheimer's researcher I knew back then, and to some extent now, is only doing about 5% of the highest priority to-do list of experiments to make a difference in Alzheimer's. And I mean literally 5%. If you looked at the whole list of these are the things I need to do at equal priority to move the ball, they were doing 1 in 20 of them. And so I said, well, look, we have a chance to work with a fund. It's not going to make us go through a lot of bureaucracy and paperwork. They trust us because we're putting this team together. But the idea has to be great, it has to be your best idea. We have to work together, form consortia, and it has to be the highest impact research. It has to be an idea that's not incremental. As Henry says, it's not going to be the 1-yard run, after kickoff. It has to be, at least a 20-yard pass or maybe even a Hail Mary. And that was a sentiment with which we got going. And man, when you look at the papers that have been published because of Cure Alzheimer's Fund and the studies that have been done, and not just the impact we've had in the field, but the amount of times that we actually initiated a whole new movement in the field. Like today, the hot thing is neuroinflammation and microglial cells and how they trigger neuroinflammation. We started doing that in 2008. And and people didn't know why we were doing it, and they never heard of it. And now all of industry is jumping onto that bandwagon after more and more academics jumped on it. That took a decade. But I can go through probably 5, 6 examples of big paradigm shifts, big movements in the field that started because of the forward thinking, the go for it, high risk, high reward attitude of Cure Alzheimer's Fund and the way they provide funding to scientists who know how to do that type of research or know how to pick high risk, high reward type of research.
It's such an important contribution that you unlocked. It's so common in big companies, and it's not a well-known fact. But what's this saying at board meetings? Nobody ever got fired for hiring McKinsey. It's the same kind of phenomenon. It's like you do incremental investments in things that are safe and won't make you look like an idiot. But we also know that those types of investments are almost never the ones that change the world. So it's an interesting, it's a very important part of what you did. The other part is this whole sharing information because we're very siloed, and research and academia is no different. Henry, was there anything specific you
Yeah.
in the structure of the fund to enforce collaboration?
Well, yes. I mean, that is something that we at Greylock practiced amongst our early stage startup companies, sharing ideas and best practices. And we said to the researchers, look, you don't have to compete for our dollars. We've chosen you. There's no bureaucracy. Give us a 3-page proposal and we'll give you the money in 2 months. And you can do the projects you have at the top of your stack of high risk, high reward. But there is a catch, and you have to share and really operate as a dream team. And we will facilitate that by holding quarterly webinars. We know how busy you are. This was even pre-COVID-19 days, of course. And once a year, we'll have an in-person day-and-a-half session of our researchers to dig more deeply in collaboration. Now, of course, that set the table, but Rudy will confirm or expand that these people are collaborating all the time by email between meetings. They really, and that was a key for the selection of this group. If you're going to do all that kind of sharing, you really have to trust one another. And there's great trust amongst the researchers at Cure Alzheimer's.
That's great. So now we're going to take a little deep dive. We're going to get a little nerdier, get a little bit into the weeds. Genetics, I don't know, 102. So you discovered the early Alzheimer's genes. Can you talk about, Rudy, what's the implication of that for treating, understanding Alzheimer's? It might be obvious to some and might not be to all.
Yeah, I will. I just quickly picking up on if I could on Henry's point.
Sure.
You know, what's happened is because of this trust that we had between each other, and we knew Cure Alzheimer's Fund was behind us. I've never in my career corresponded so much with so many key researchers on a daily basis by email, phone calls. It's all been self-organized and self-emerging since then, because Cure Alzheimer's Fund trusted us, put us together. But the other thing about that is you might say, well, are you guys all just kind of okaying each other's research and saying, you know, wink, wink, nod, nod, that's good. And it's just the opposite. Because we're all talking all the time, we're really keeping each other honest. And we're a very frank, open group where we call each other out. And it's like playing basketball. You know, you play hard, you know, you block somebody's shot, but you leave it on the court. Right? You don't take it personally. And that's how we are. We really go at each other's throats about what's the best research and what's the best thing to do. We review each other's grants. We're highly critical of each other. We don't take it personally. But because of that type of perspective, which is very unique because you have a group of people who trust each other, who are trusted by a foundation like Cure Alzheimer's Fund, the research we do ends up mostly in the highest impact journals, Science, Nature, Cell, and drives the field. So this model has really worked. And I would never imagine when we first started, whatever it was, 16 years ago, that it would get to this point where just one high impact research result comes out of this. And it's all because of the way it developed and was organized.
Maybe your next book, Rudy, you should write about the enormous benefit of constructive public discourse, or at least discourse and debate, because maybe our political system have something to learn from that. That's just a little side joke.
We do avoid the ad hominem attacks. Yes. But anyway, on the science. So the first genes we found so when I was a student at Harvard, I found the gene that I named APP, amyloid precursor protein. And obviously it's the protein that makes the amyloid that's in the plaques. And at the time, we didn't know what the course of the disease was in the brain, right? We knew nothing. I mean, Alzheimer himself in 1906 looked in the brain of this 57-year-old woman who was suffering from dementia. And he saw the plaques and he saw these tangles. The plaques were outside of the neurons, sticky boulders of goo, didn't know what they were. He saw that inside the neurons, there were these twisted filaments that choked and killed the neurons. We call those tangles now. And he saw a lot of inflammation. And he said, I think this has something to do with why she's suffering from dementia. And believe it or not, at that time, they didn't buy it because the idea that physical lesions in the brain would affect mental activities was unheard of. You know, so even Jung was in the audience and like it just went over like a lead balloon. And then for 80 years, we just kind of looked at this pathology and didn't know what to make of it. And then when we found the gene that makes the amyloid, that was back in summer of 86. We published it in 87. We said, okay, look at this. The plaque actually comes from a protein that's made by a gene, and it's a normal gene. And then we said, look, there's mutations in this gene where you make too much of this amyloid and it goes up into a plaque. And then that plaque and that amyloid, as it accumulates, causes the nerve cell, to make a tangle, and now the tangle kills the nerve cell. And that's where we were, starting with the early onset genes. They all told us amyloid. Even the late onset gene, ApoE, everything said amyloid. And the problem was that every time we tried to hit amyloid in a clinical trial in patients who were already suffering from dementia, we did not help them. We would clear amyloid from the brain, but they wouldn't get better cognitively. And that led to this huge debate in the newspapers and around saying, we're barking up the wrong tree, hitting amyloid's the wrong way to go, the amyloid hypothesis is wrong. And it's just not that black and white, and it's not true. All of the genetics says amyloid triggers this disease. You have to ask, why hitting amyloid don't you help patients? And you can look back to answer that. You can look back at heart disease and cholesterol, okay? So think about how we figured out cholesterol has something to do with heart disease, right? In those early days, Brown and Goldstein, who got the Nobel Prize, studied rare families, just like we studied rare Alzheimer's families, who had early onset of heart disease, just like the first families we studied had early onset familial Alzheimer's. And they found a mutation in a gene that makes cholesterol, that controls cholesterol, I should say. And they proposed, hey, we think cholesterol has something to do with heart disease. Now, suppose after that, the only thing we did was gave people with congestive heart failure who just had a heart attack Lipitor and said, now get better. Well, they wouldn't get better. But no, we were smarter back then. We said, we believe it's cholesterol. We're going to monitor your cholesterol. We're going to try to bring it down. And if you have to take a drug like Lipitor or statin to bring it down, you will. That's to avoid heart disease 10, 20 years from now. Mm-hmm. Well, now what we've learned fast forwarding is it's exactly analogous with Alzheimer's. The early genetics told us amyloid starts this disease, just like cholesterol came out of heart disease from early genetics. But treating amyloid has to happen before onset. You avoid Alzheimer's by hitting amyloid early in life, 2 decades before symptoms. Very analogous to cholesterol and heart disease.
Rudy, you're going to have to speed up your answers because we're going to run out of time.
But that was a very big point. So
it was a very big point.
But that's a very important one because people are very confused about whether amyloid's the right target.
And where is this settled now? Would you say, is it kind of settled? Or is there consensus in the scientific community about what you just said? Is this one of those
scientists so scientists who actually read papers in science, yes. Scientists who read the Wall Street Journal and New York Times, no. So you really have
still work to do.
Yeah. The scientists who are really keeping up on the science know that this is settled. Amyloid does cause the disease, but it happens it starts decades before symptoms, and that's when you have to hit it. And so the amyloid causes these tangles, right? But you can get tangles by bangs to the head. You don't have to, like if you're playing pro football or boxing, bangs to the head can get you tangles without amyloid, and that's called CTE. And so these are the early pathologies, plaques and tangles. And so I'll just cut to the chase. What Cure Alzheimer's Fund is doing is we're developing one set of drugs that will hit those plaques and tangles early in life, way before symptoms. And that drug took 20 years to develop, and Cure Alzheimer's Fund's been funding that drug. It's called a GSM, a gamma secretase modulator. And that drug's going into phase 1 trials next year. And it's been a long journey. That will be the drug that my daughter, who's 12, right? When she turns 30 or 40, she'll be tested to see where her amyloid is in her brain. And if it's too high, just like cholesterol, you bring it down before you get into trouble. It's a whole, yeah.
No, that's fine. I'm just trying to move forward on another. That's a big paradigm shifting thing that you guys have contributed to. One of my favorites is this whole Alzheimer's a dish idea, the Petri dish idea. Could you talk about that and why that was such a breakthrough and important?
Yeah. So when we learned that if you want to help a patient right now, you have to stop the neuroinflammation, right? So I like to say the plaque is the match, comes early on. The tangles are the brush fires that spread. That's not enough to give you Alzheimer's. It's enough to start it. But then the brain has to react to that with neuroinflammation. Just like with COVID, right? The COVID virus doesn't kill enough cells to give you, to kill you. COVID has to cause inflammation in your vessels and lungs to cause problems. Same thing, and it's very analogous in Alzheimer's. So we said we have to find drugs, if we want to help patients right now who are already suffering, we have to find drugs to stop neuroinflammation. So, but the thing is, if you look at the mice, it takes them like over a year to get to that point of neuroinflammation. How are you going to test one approved drug or one natural product at a time in a mouse? Each one takes a year, staggering costs. So we developed Alzheimer's in a Dish. Cure Alzheimer's Fund got behind us. This was a crazy idea at the time. And again, Cure Alzheimer's Fund, high risk, high reward, go for it. So we created these little mini human brain organoids the size of paper punches. So you could have a plate with 96 wells in it. And in each well, there's a little mini brain organoid, little gelatinous material with neurons, and it's creating plaques and tangles and then getting the neuroinflammation. And we could recreate the disease process in 1 month in a paper punch size mini brain organoid. And that made drug testing and drug screening 10 times faster and 100 times cheaper. And we went for it. And so we have this, what's called the 3D DS. It's called, because we call these brain organoids 3D cultures. So we have a drug screening program for these little brain organoids. And out of that, we have found numerous drugs that either stop the plaques. We have found approved drugs and natural products that stop the plaques from causing tangles. But most importantly for patients right now, we found 36 drugs or natural products that stop the neuroinflammation or protect against it. And those are the ones we're pushing through, because those are the ones that are going to treat patients right now. And we already have a success story from 2 of them. And for another one, we're going to get a readout on November 30th from a phase 3 trial. So the one trial already finished in ALS with one set of drugs that came out of the screen. And that was a company that Cure Alzheimer's Fund helped get going that I worked with called Amylyx. And we had a successful ALS trial by protecting against neuroinflammation. Now that's being tried on Alzheimer's. We'll get that readout this year. And another set of drugs stops the neuroinflammation, not just protects against it. And that company, AZ Therapies, their readout will be at the end of November. You'll hear probably the results sometime around early next year. And this was all made possible. The 2 newest trials, the 2 only trials in the field, in the world on neuroinflammation and neurodegenerative disease came from Cure Alzheimer's Fund. Think about that. Think about Lilly, Pfizer, Biogen, J&J. Cure Alzheimer's Fund is what engendered the 2 first neuroinflammation trials, and one already worked, protecting in ALS, now trying Alzheimer's. And the other one, that drug will phase 3 trial, we'll get that readout later this year. So it's pretty amazing what a foundation can do as long as you're forward thinking and willing to take chances.
All right, let's turn to the sort of question on a lot of people's minds. I think there's 71 million baby boomers heading towards an age where they're most vulnerable. What steps can people take in their 50s and 60s to prevent or slow down the progression of Alzheimer's?
You're asking me, right?
Yes.
Because I know Henry knows the answer too.
You, Rudy.
Yeah. So I wrote a number of books on this topic, and the last book I wrote, we had an action plan for a lifestyle that was meant to limit the amount of inflammation in the body and neuroinflammation in the brain. Because, like I said, the neuroinflammation is what kills the most neurons. The plaques and tangles get you there; they trigger it. But what kills enough neurons to give you Alzheimer's or even Parkinson's disease or ALS is neuroinflammation. So we're thinking about how do you try to reduce inflammation in your body and in your brain? And I came up with this acronym to summarize what I said in the book, of an acronym of SHIELD. And I tweeted out SHIELD, and then it went kind of viral. And the next thing you know, I was talking about it on TV shows and Today's Show and NBC Nightly News did a whole segment on it. And it's become kind of a thing. And so SHIELD, S stands for sleep. And sleep is so important because it's during sleep that you clear amyloid out of your brain. So you're making amyloid all day. And then the way you clean this debris is deep sleep. So you have to try to get 7 to 8 hours per day. And if you can't get it all at once at night, you can still take naps. If you have a good nap and go into like some REM sleep, it's, if you know you had a dream like REM, then it's after that that you get that cleaning. I call it mental floss, where you're cleaning the brain with sleep. So sleep is very important. It's also when you consolidate your memory. So all day, short-term memory is being triggered, and you consolidate the most important parts into long-term memory while you sleep as well. So that's important for memory. So sleep to me is number one. The H, do you want me to go through these? Or
Yes,
Yes, please.
Yeah. So the H stands for handling stress. Stress is a killer. Chronic stress leads to chronic inflammation. And these are stressful days. 2020 is a pretty, as you know, stressful year. So for stress, we talk about, managing expectation, which we have to do a lot of in 2020, but also developing a meditation practice. And it doesn't have to be anything like where you're sitting in a lotus position, chanting. I mean, just sit in a chair with your back straight and close your eyes and try not to think about anything. Just try to do that, a few times a day for 20 minutes. It goes a long way. And we actually published studies on how meditation has dramatic effects on gene expression in the body, especially gene expression that brings inflammation down and even neuroinflammation. So, it's not a woo-woo thing. Meditation physically actually works well on the body. Just turn it off at least 20, maybe 40, if possible, an hour a day, maybe 3 times a day, at least 2 times a day. And I like to say, if people say, I don't have time to meditate, they're the people who need to meditate the most, just so you know. So I is interaction, meaning interaction with others, being social. Especially, right now we talk about social distancing. It really isn't social distancing. It's physical distancing that we're doing. But right now we're physically distancing, but we're not socially distancing on Zoom. And so staying social, and especially if you have older loved ones, call them every day, FaceTime them, because they're most vulnerable. Loneliness is a risk factor for Alzheimer's, increased risk of twofold. Loneliness means you're alone and you don't like it, not just being alone. So especially older folks right now, your parents, grandparents, give them a call because they really need that interaction to help their brains. E in SHIELD stands for exercise. And Cure Alzheimer's Fund funded a tremendous study in my lab. We published it in Science in an article showing how exercise alone made Alzheimer's mice better. That we have, we try all these different things on Alzheimer's mice. We give them a running wheel. Just give them a running wheel. And it was as good as any drug we tried. These mice, if they're on a running wheel from when they're young, what happens is the exercise causes blood flow to increase. That brings in factors from the body into the brain through blood flow that actually trigger the birth of new neurons in the brain, neurogenesis, especially in the short-term memory part of the brain that is affected in Alzheimer's, the hippocampus. And it also induces growth factors to keep those neurons alive and nurture them, like growth factors, things called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF. And it also stimulates, we have a new paper we're just submitting now to sell from Cure Alzheimer's Fund. Exercise stimulates the removal of amyloid better than anything. It actually, we figured out the whole pathway of how it stimulates the digestion and clearance of amyloid from the brain. So exercise.
Any particular exercise, Rudy? Like, is it, you get your heart rate up to X, any duration?
Yeah. So if you're wearing a Fitbit type of thing like this, aim at 8,000 steps per day. Okay. And don't cheat like me where you're at like 7,500 and you just move your arm around to get to 8,000, because that's how it works. But 8,000 steps per day is where you want to aim. So, it doesn't have to be hardcore exercise. It could be a stationary bike or a treadmill. Just take a few walks or just walk around the house. Just move. 8,000 steps per day. Nothing special. So that's exercise. Finally, L is learn new things. So right now, if you're learning new things, I'm helping you. And if we're putting you to sleep, we're still helping you, right? So learning new things is cognitive reserve or synaptic reserve. So here's the bottom line. you heard about the plaques and the tangles and the neuroinflammation, but what really correlates with the degree of dementia or degree of cognitive decline as you get older? Loss of synapses. That's the loss of connections between nerve cells. So you have 100 billion neurons, and they make trillions of connections to create your neural network. So every day as you're experiencing things and learning new things, putting something new in context with what you already knew, association, that's learning. You're not only making new synapses when you learn something new, you're reinforcing the ones you already have. Because learning is associating the new thing with what you already knew, constantly building on your experiences. And this is all represented in your neural network. And some people have up to a quadrillion synapses. Well, here's the bottom line. The more synapses you lose, the more you head downward toward cognitive dysfunction and dementia. So it goes to say then, if the more synapses you make every day and reinforce, the more you can lose before you lose it. So when you think about retirement, think as much about your synaptic reserve as your financial reserve. So you can use those finances. Because the more synapses you have, it creates resiliency. Resiliency of the brain is two things: driving down inflammation with SHIELD, but also drive up those synaptic counts, drive up the synapses by learning, not brain games, right? And I say if it's the crossword puzzle, only the Saturday and Sunday crossword puzzle will make you learn something new in New York Times, because you have to probably look up the answer and learn something new. So learn new things.
And D?
D is diet. And it's very simple. The best diet for the mind and the brain is the Mediterranean diet. So less meat. I'm a vegetarian personally, but less meat, maybe more fish or other protein sources, more olive oil, but mostly you need plant-based diet as part of your diet, because a plant-based diet, vegetables, fruits, seeds, nuts, is what feeds your gut microbiome. So we have trillions of bacteria in our gut, thousands of strains of bacteria that are keeping your body healthy. And there's what's called a gut-brain axis. The bacteria in your brain, in your gut, actually keep your brain healthy. And this is proven, beyond a doubt. You can affect inflammation in your brain. Cure Alzheimer's Fund funded 4 papers where we show that your gut microbiome affects the amount of amyloid in your brain, as well as inflammation. So how do you keep your gut happy? Well, you've all heard about probiotics. Of course, many take probiotics. Well, what's that? You're adding maybe, a million or 500 million or maybe a billion bacteria to trillions. It's like, you're adding a drop in the bucket. But it's better to think about prebiotics. A prebiotic is the plant-based fiber that your bacteria in your gut love. So vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, this is what keeps those bacteria happy. And if they're happy, they keep the brain happy. So keeping your gut microbiome healthy is essential. So not just probiotics, but prebiotics, meaning a very rich plant-based diet in addition to whatever else you eat during the day.
That's awesome.
SHIELD.
Yeah. I want to remind everybody, please submit questions in the Q&A. We have a few, and I'm going to soon bring in Eric, and we're going to talk about some of those questions. But I wanted to ask Henry, which I think is important also for this audience. Talk about the, first of all, funding. How is it going for what have you achieved so far, and how is the pandemic affecting you? And also I want to talk about how you deal with admin costs and other things you've seen in other philanthropies.
Okay, well,
do differently.
Taking the second one first. One of the things that Greylock's founder, Bill Elfers, taught me was the importance of an alignment of interests. And in the venture capital context of Greylock, he was always interested in aligning the interest of the in limited partner investors with that of the general partner, with that of the entrepreneur being backed. And so at Greylock, we took less current income than most venture firms. And we don't have a 2% fee. We have a budgeted base fee that causes the administrative and operating costs of Greylock to break even every year, which translates into about 1.5% or 1.25% for some partnerships. But in return, we have one of the highest carried interests in the industry, 30%, which in his opinion align the interest. If we could create great value, then the general partners could share great value. If we didn't, we shouldn't get wealthy on our fees. And then when we put Cure Alzheimer's together, I'd never raised money from friends, family, and strangers. I said the board and the founders will pay all the operating costs, because I want anybody who's generous enough to donate to our cause to know that 100 cents of their dollar will go to the research. And we've kept that for 16 years. We have the highest rating from Charity Navigator and from GuideStar of any nonprofit doing Alzheimer's disease research. And part of that rating is based on that approach. As for the growth of the firm, of the fund, in the last 4 years, our growth rate in donations, i.e. revenue, has grown compounded at 22, 23% a year. It's amazing. It looks like a Greylock portfolio company. And I can only attribute that to Rudy and the other scientists and to people buying in to the model that we are advocating. This year, COVID-19 has had its problems, obviously, but luckily our fundraising approach didn't rely on a huge gala, for example, which probably was challenging. Instead, through mid-October, we were up 1% over the prior year. So we're clearly not going to grow the 23% that the prior 4 years have had. But I'm guessing that being up at all for a nonprofit like us in the pandemic recession, it puts us in the top quartile at least. And
can you and will you and could you share roughly how much money you've put to work into research?
Yeah. We started small, obviously, as a startup, but we've done over 110 million of research dollars. We've leveraged that tremendously, because once projects are de-risked, our researchers are able to go back to the NIH to get much larger grants that they couldn't get before. I don't know how accurate the study is, but one of our staff members found that in 2018, we did 17 million of grants, and that has led to an additional funding of 121 million from NIH in just that 1 year. So you can see the leverage effect that our high-risk de-risking strategy might cause.
Great. Maybe as we bring back Eric and we can have a little Q&A, we have some questions come in, but maybe if I just ask you a short answer on when you started this, your outlook, how optimistic are you about the future of finding a cure, how much progress we can make in the next whatever time frame, 10, 15 years?
Yeah, I'm very optimistic. When I started it, I knew anything that I was able to help achieve was not going to help my wife. But Allison and I have a 42-year-old daughter, and I'm very optimistic that the kinds of things that Rudy and the whole research and biotech community that have nothing to do with Cure Alzheimer's will have effective therapies of both kinds that Rudy talked about by 15 years for sure, and maybe much sooner. Rudy says.
You agree?
I think, I think we're going to have the first drugs that move amyloid already. We just need ones that are cheap enough to give to 38 million people. That's how many people have amyloid in their brain without symptoms, 38 million. So it has to be a small molecule that's cheap. Antibodies like biogens are very expensive. So we know how to move amyloid. We just got to find the safest, cheapest way to do it and get the FDA to work with us.
We don't want to miss it. Rudy's gamma secretase modulator, his and a researcher named Steve Wagner, we're about to go into clinical trials with a non-NIH grant, and that is a small molecule that could serve that need.
That could be the statin, the equivalent of statin for cholesterol, what would it be for amyloid for Alzheimer's in the future? Because, the FDA says, look, we agree if you could hit amyloid early, that's a good thing to do. But, if it's going to be an antibody that costs several $1,000s a month and it's not particularly safe, how's someone going to take that for 40 years? Because you might have to start taking this thing at 40 years old, just like a statin. So we're working toward that vision. I think that in the next few years, we will have the first amyloid drugs that you need to take early. But I think even sooner, we already have drugs in the pipe for the neuroinflammation side. And, like I said, Cure Alzheimer's Fund already helped a drug combination that worked in ALS, and it's going for FDA approval now. And it should also work in Alzheimer's because it's the same mechanism of neuroinflammation. Neuroinflammation, no matter how you get there, is the same mechanism in Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, Huntington's. It's just different routes to get there. But you stop that, you help the patient. So that's what we're focusing. And our first drugs already worked in ALS. We got another drug in the pipe. We got a bunch more. We have now a whole new consortium, task force we started called Act Fast, which is a clinical trial task force to get a bunch of other approved drugs that are safe and natural products into combination trials as soon as possible. And so this is the next big phase for Cure Alzheimer's Fund. So I'm very optimistic about when we'll start seeing the first drugs, and Cure Alzheimer's Fund is behind it, honestly.
Eric, do you want to take a question or two? I have one that I'm dying to ask. Oh, you're on. Oh, here you are. Oh,
wonderful questions. Very engaged. But one question, Rudy, is very fascinated with Shield. What in terms of supplements or anything beyond the Mediterranean diet and Shield do you do to either maintain optimum brain health for yourself or you recommend to your friends?
Yeah, sometimes when I give talks, when I get to the diet part of Shield, I talk about supplements, and I gotta be careful because, of course, for any supplements I talk about, they haven't been used in clinical trials yet, so you can't say anything definitive about them. B, most brain supplements out there are pure money-making snake oil bunk. I mean, absolute just money-making crap. And the other thing is that, I have to say that what I recommend as supplements comes out of lab models, Alzheimer's in a dish, mouse studies. But I try to recommend ones that are safe that I can see, at least in those models, are hitting inflammation or plaques or tangles. So with all those caveats behind us, because I don't want to sound like a snake oil guy, because I'm not. The ones I personally use and recommend to friends and family and local football teams would be True Niagen, which is nicotinamide riboside, because it increases cellular energy. And as neurons have more energy, they can be more resilient to tangles. It can also help prevent neuroinflammation. So we're doing an Alzheimer's trial in the McCance Center at Mass General right now on Alzheimer's with True Niagen or nicotinamide riboside. I started a company to get cat's claw, which is a woody vine supplement from the rainforest and Amazonian rainforest in Peru. It's sold as Percepta. I am a part of that company for disclaimer. And but I believed in it so much that we published a big paper on showing how cat's claw can reduce inflammation and tangles. So those are the two biggies that I like, with the caveat stated. But other things you can do, keep your vitamin D3 up, especially with COVID. D3 directly correlates with severity of disease, your D3 levels. Also, omega-3 fatty acids. So if you're taking fish oil, make sure it's a very, very purified one, like Nordic Naturals. I use a Spectrum vegan omega-3 fish oil, omega-3 that comes from algae, not from fish, because I worry a little bit about fish oil and heavy metals that contaminate the ocean right now. They concentrate in the fats. So those are the biggies. Then we recently found a few more out of the dish that I started recommending. I started taking Quercetin, which is Quercetin, Quercetin, and Fisetin, Fisetin. Both of them had very strong antioxidant properties in our dish model, Quercetin and Fisetin. And then there's an Ayurvedic herb supplement called ashwagandha, which is ASHWANGHND, something like ashwagandha. And ashwagandha helps get the amyloid out of the brain. And again, this is all based on lab models and clinical trials are pending, so take it all with a grain of salt, but don't actually take the salt.
Eric,
our families that are on this call, I know when we spoke at one point, Rudy, you did mention that well-advertised product, Prevagen, is something that people should stay away from. So we'll just pass that along to everyone on the call.
Yeah, as long as this is not a public forum, I can say that Prevagen is just jellyfish.
There is a question here that I think that I actually skipped in my prepared questions, which that is that women are much more vulnerable to the disease. Why is that the case?
We don't know why yet. 2/3 of patients are women. Yeah. And there's something about menopause and the dip in estrogen and the dip in energy metabolism in the brain that makes women more vulnerable later on, especially to inflammation. We're doing a study with Maria Shriver on whether on the true Niagen, nicotinamide riboside increases cellular energy. So we're thinking if maybe during menopause, supplement energy in the brain by increasing the fuel, the ATP in the mitochondria with this true Niagen. So we're trying that there. So the honest answer is we don't know, but it has something to do with hypometabolism or reduced energy in the brain after estrogen levels go down, making the brain more susceptible to inflammation. That's what we know so far.
I have a question, Rudy and Henry. So we've just talked a little bit about what we can do to help ourselves. What could anyone on this call do to help your organization or to help the cause of advancing a cure for Alzheimer's? What should we do? As individuals, as donors, what can we do?
You know, we obviously would welcome any financial support. And all I would say is we try and treat anybody who is an interested donor to be more like our partner. We publish frequent newsletters. They're pretty scientific in nature, but we do not want to just be the nonprofit that sends you a solicitation letter once a year at Thanksgiving and then doesn't communicate with you before. So we try and educate our community as best we can. We put on our website, you'll see speeches by Rudy like this that we've recorded and presentations he's made. They're available to anybody who wants to listen to them. And I think in 45 or 50 minutes of listening to that, you can get a very good education on the latest state of the art of research on Alzheimer's disease. But obviously for us, my job is to continue to raise money for the scientists like Rudy.
Count the Becker family in. So another question is for Rudy. Are there any early tests that make it easy to either detect amyloids or to detect the early onset of Alzheimer's? Is there any testing that helps with this? Help us know more early.
That's a great question and so important. I just spent 3 hours this morning on a call with 50 of the top Alzheimer's researchers in the world for the World Dementia Council. And that was the topic. And the FDA was on the call as well, the highest ranking people at the FDA. And the topic was, okay, we're getting an idea of how to treat patients now, stop neuroinflammation, we're making progress. But for the future, how do we carry out early detection of this disease and early intervention, like seeing high cholesterol and bringing it down with a statin and heart disease? And this has been the mantra of Cure Alzheimer's Fund since the beginning: early prediction through genetics, early detection through biomarkers, early intervention. Well, it turns out we have a whole host of blood biomarkers that are looking better and better. We had the top people in the world who discovered those on this Zoom this morning that I was on. There's things like tau protein and neurofilament light chain, and et cetera. And there are also imaging. There's ways to image for amyloid and tau in the brain. And there's ways to do digital technologies. I'm involved with developing a device that uses VR and eye tracking and voice analysis to see early problems in the brain. So the future will be early detection with blood-based biomarkers, digital biomarkers, imaging-based biomarkers, with algorithms that combine those. And then most importantly, use that to do early interventions. So there was a question about what I think about aducanumab, you know, the antibody from Biogen that brings amyloid down. Well, you know, my lab, Rob Moyer, the late Rob Moyer, who passed away last year at 58, he and I published a paper that inspired aducanumab. We showed the existence of autoantibodies to amyloid in the body that protect you. And that's what aducanumab was based on when Neurimmune in Switzerland developed it, and they licensed it to Biogen. The problem is, if you use aducanumab in patients who are already symptomatic, it's kind of too late. I mean, Biogen was hoping that maybe it might not be too late if you do the earliest possible patients. But something like aducanumab or R-gamma secretase modulator, any drug that hits amyloid, you need to use it as early as possible before symptoms. And that means you need to have biomarkers for early detection. And they can be imaging-based, blood-based, it can be digital, and then you do the early intervention. That's going to be the future of how we eradicate this disease.
And
That's awesome.
And
I
we're
want to
getting,
leave it.
we're getting
go
very
ahead, Henry.
close to biomarker. Well, I would just say that we're getting very close to having accepted biomarkers. That I think is going to happen in the next year or two.
Yes.
I know there are some questions we didn't get to. I'm sure we'll figure out a way to get them to you. I want to just close my end and thank you, Henry and Rudy, for joining us. This is so important. The work you've done is incredible. And I'm a big fan, big supporter. I hope people will join us in that support. And I'll hand it over to you, Eric, to close it out so we can end on time.
Everyone for joining us today for what was a great discussion. We hope that you are walking away with new information and new understanding of steps you can start taking today to reduce your chances and those of loved ones of developing this devastating illness. We also hope that you leave inspired by the drive and passion exhibited by these two remarkable men who have devoted everything, their time, energy, and money into the effort to find a treatment and cure for a disease that has eluded scientists for years. The progress that has been made in such a short amount of time is amazing, really astounding, and should leave us all wondering how we can be that spark in our own lives and work, or take some of these ideas and apply them to other complex and vital problems. This year, despite all the challenges, has turned into an incredible year of learning for our Cresset friends and families. And as we have been able to transform what was live events in our offices to the virtual world, we look forward to seeing you and seeing what next year has in store for us. We are hopeful about the future, that we'll once again be able to gather in person in addition to doing these amazing virtual events. And we have an incredible lineup of topics and resources to kick off 2021. So please keep an eye out for more information on that from our events team. And for today's call, be on the lookout for a follow-up email that'll include a link to the recording, as well as we'll be sure that whether it's some of the questions we didn't get to, and certainly the discussion we had about things that we can do for ourselves and family around SHIELD and some of the supplements, we'll be sure to get that information out to you, or at least the spelling of the names. And so that we can all continue to learn about Alzheimer's disease, and as well as how we can personally contribute to help fund this research. So thank you again, Mats, wonderful facilitation and inspiration, and Henry and Rudy, thank you so much too, from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, everyone. Safe Thanksgiving and healthy.